Hey everyone, I'm Dr. John Whyte, Chief Medical Officer at WebMD, and you're watching Coronavirus in Context. What's the impact of COVID-19 on our pets? We've been talking about it a few times over the past couple of months. So to provide some new insights, I've asked Dr. Will Draper. He's the practice director of the Village Vet, as well as a popular blogger here at WebMD. Dr. Will, thanks for joining me.
Great to be here. Thank you, Dr. John, for having me.
Now, let's start off with the impact of this pandemic on pets. Because early on, we thought it was just going to be, at one point, we thought it was just going to be 2 weeks, and then it became several months. So what's the impact on our pets, even from the perspective of companionship? We're around all the time. They weren't used to that. And for some of us, they're going to be going back to work. How is that going to impact when they've been used to it for 6-7 months?
You know, the pets will probably breathe a sigh of relief. One thing that's very interesting with pets and their owners being together more often, one of the impacts of the pets is that they're going to the vet more often because owners are seeing things that they don't typically see during the day that they may find to be unusual behavior, but really are typically what pets do all day. Not to be real graphic or gross about it, we've seen an increase in things like potential anal gland issues or areas down in the private area, if you will, because they're noticing their pets, kind of paying a lot of attention to that. And they feel like there's something wrong, but it's really what they do all day when they're bored. So those pets are now getting more attention, being seen more, which has increased our caseload. Increased our, we're an industry that's very, very busy. It's a good thing in a sense. It's challenging because most practices are doing the curbside service, which also is a little different for pets because they typically come in with their owners, but we're getting them out of the cars and bringing them in. So the pets will probably be as happy to find a end and solution to this pandemic as we are.
But let's talk about anxiety in pets. We do have data that shows pets can be anxious. There may be some pets who might have been adopted early on. So you've been with them, every day, all day for some of them for 7 months, and you may be going back to work. And then there's, our pets that we've had for a while where they've seen us all the time. And now they were anxious then when we were there all the time, as you said. But now there's a change. Just like humans, pets don't often respond that well to change. So what should owners, pet lovers be looking out for, perhaps as a sign that their pet may be anxious?
Some of the signs of anxiety in pets, and that's a great question because we're seeing a lot of that. With the majority of the pets we see are dogs, and anxious dogs tend to, hide in closed spaces a lot. They like to be in dark rooms. So if you're finding your pets spending a lot of time in a small bathroom or a closet, that can be a sign of anxiety. Gastrointestinal issues can be a sign of anxiety. Also, issues like inappropriate urination, along with the gastrointestinal, loose stool. Excessive grooming is something we see in a lot of cats that are anxious, and dogs.
So in cats, because that can be tough in cats to tell. How do we tell if they're anxious? Is it, perhaps furniture is being torn a little? What would we see maybe in cats that might be different?
Again, excessive grooming, inappropriate urination is a big one. Unusual bathroom habits, going right outside of the litter box or urinating on the owner's bed or pillow, if you will.
What about biting? Do we see biting more often in pets?
You will see some, yes. You will see a little bit more aggression because with that anxiety sometimes comes fear. But typically a dog or a cat who is not generally aggressive, you may not see that, but it's certainly a sign of anxiety. Some pets lose their appetite and may interact in different situations differently than they typically do.
Fear has come up with the issue of masks. that pets, particularly dogs, aren't used to seeing a lot of people with masks,
Yeah.
including their owners. So what's the impact of mask wearing on our pets? Either ourselves or when they see other people, that might come to the home, or even outside when we're on a walk.
It's again one of trepidation, anxiety, fear, because they react a lot by our facial expressions and our emotions, and
Mhm.
that mask cuts a lot of that off. So they are sometimes caught in between, if you in a bit of a quandary as to how they react to certain people. Who is this person? Even my own dog has barked at me walking in the house with a mask on until I take the mask off
What
because,
kind of dog does Will Draper have?
well, the Draper family, we have 5 dogs. We have 2 golden doodles, a small Australian Labradoodle, and 2 French bulldogs.
Mhm.
And the Labradoodle is our puppy, who is a more recent addition, and that's something we're also seeing a lot of during the pandemic. People adoptions and through shelters, private organizations, breeders have just gone up through the roof. This time last year, shelters were overwhelmed, and now you can't. There are no pets in the shelters. There are no pets at animal control because people are craving that love, craving something they can hug,
But is there a
that
concern?
affection.
Yeah, but is there a concern when people start going back to work, it might be harder to take care of those pets that they otherwise were home for many months. So do we have to be watchful for potential challenges there?
Absolutely. That is a concern that we have. What's going to happen when the dust clears and we get through this pandemic and back to whatever the new normal is? Will these pets start showing up in the shelters again? A lot of parents are getting pets now, for their children who always wanted a dog, and they just never found the time or found the right time to do it. And now suddenly their kids are home all day, and they're getting this dog not only to give them some companionship, their kids, but also to give them a break from their kids.
Yeah.
And they're teaching their kids how to take care of these pets. When they go back to school, there is a concern about, well, now that the kids are in school and nobody's taking care of the dog, that the parent may not have necessarily included in their day-to-day activity. Will they end up back in the shelter? We hope not. We all try to talk a lot more about animal care and long-term care with our clients who just are recent adopters, to hopefully help them be able to bridge that gap in a sense once we get through this.
So a lot of misinformation about transmission in pets. You mentioned about someone or something to hug. Is it safe to hug our pets? Safe for us and for our pets? Is it safe to kiss our pets? What's the latest that we know about COVID in pets?
Still, there's no evidence that pets can transmit COVID or actually become ill from COVID. Of course, there have been situations where an animal's through nasal swabs has tested positive for COVID, some cats and dogs, but there is no evidence that the cat or dog will transmit that to humans or other animals, because there is a slight, there's still a lot we don't know, but because there is a slight possibility that the virus can survive in their mucous membranes, nasal passages, there's also some thought that even just they could be
Yeah.
a vector, if you will, by contact. If you have COVID, it's recommended that you have somebody else care for your pet just in case
Okay.
there is a possibility of that. Let somebody else take care of the pet for
But
you while you're
if you
ill.
don't have COVID, okay to
You
hug
don't
the
have
dog.
COVID. If you don't have COVID, absolutely okay to hug the dog. Hug them away. That's the only thing you can hug right now.
And hug the cat if the cat wants to be hugged.
Hug the cat if the
Let
cat
us
wants to
know.
be hugged. Exactly.
All right.
Exactly.
Well, Dr. Will Draper, I want to thank you for taking the time to share your insights today to help provide, what we can safely do, with our pets, as well as what to be on the lookout for our pets, experiencing anxiety as well.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you for having me, and everybody stay safe and healthy out there. We'll get through this.
And we'll look forward to your latest blog on WebMD. Thanks again.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching Coronavirus in Context.